organized by Paralimes in close collaboration with the European Science Foundation. Most of you have participated in the 2 previous webinars. If not, I strongly recommend that you look at the recordings of these webinars on the website of Paralimes. The challenge for these webinars follow from the observation that complexity science and reality seem to have grown apart. The synopsis for the series indicates some possible reasons for this divergence. It may have started as the complexity of the world we live in grew beyond the human scale, and as our natural ways of gaining knowledge how to deal with this real-world complexity lost its human context. Partly, no doubt, as an effect of the technologies that were spawned by our reduction in science, partly also as a consequence of the growth in human population, and partly as a result of the interactions between these and other factors. As the human-induced problems continue to grow in complexity, and as their consequences transform into existential risks, there is an urgent need for humanity to regain its sense of knowing how to deal with this complexity. We think that for that to happen, we may need a new type of science, a science that is not defined by disciplines, but by the potential that emerges from the reality of a messy and complex world. The webinars Complexity, Science and Reality take that as a starting point. The challenge is to create a setting in which ideas for new approaches how to deal with the complexity of the real world can emerge, and to prepare the minds of its participants, you in other words, for exploring such approaches. To lead these explorations, we have invited 9 world-class speakers. The first speaker was Atsushi Iriki. His talk was moderated by Sander van der Leeuw. The second speaker was Sander van der Leeuw, whose talk was moderated by Stefan Thurner. And the speaker today is Stefan Thurner, who will be introduced by Andrew Sheng, who, among many other things, is a distinguished fellow of the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong and the chief advisor to the China Banking Regulatory Commission. Andrew will moderate the discussion and will be the speaker in our next webinar. So if Andrew is already online, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Andrew. Is he online already?
Unfortunately, I do not see him yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in that case,
we may have to proceed without Andrew for this moment, but if he joins, I will let you know.
All right. So then let me shortly introduce Stefan Thurner for you. I have not prepared this introduction because I thought I would have Andrew to do this. Stefan, I know already a long time. He more or less introduced me to complexity a long time ago, at the time that we were together in Singapore, as he as a visiting professor and I as one of the people who set up the Complexity Institute. And in that process, he set up an institute in Vienna. That's the Complexity Hub in Vienna, which I think now is one of the leading institutes on complexity in Europe, if not beyond. I can simply say that Stefan is an extremely nice guy to work with, extremely intelligent, and I hope you will enjoy his talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Hello. I'm doing something wrong here.
Let me check.
Now the echo should be off.
Yes, that's fine.
Can you hear me well?
Very well.
But I can't hear you. Okay, but I don't have to hear. Okay. Thank you, Jan, for the invitation to this series and for the introduction. I will try to share my screen now. Please tell me if you are able to see the screen.
We can see it.
Okay. Following Jan's title, Reality, Complexity, and Science, I'll talk a little bit about what I think reality is and how it connects to science, and then how that connects to complexity. And after clarifying these kind of trivial points, I'll show you two examples where I think I can demonstrate you how understanding complex realities with science can be done. I'll show you an example of supply chains, which I think is very exciting, and I will show you very new work where we can say something about the origin of polarization in our societies. So addressing, as Jan said, necessities of our time. So what is reality? I'm a great fan of Lucretius, this Roman thinker that no one knows anything about except his fantastic opus De Rerum Natura. He said, among many other things, nothing comes from nothing. And he was, I don't know if I'm telling everyone now things that you already know, but Lucretius was an extremely deep thinker. He anticipated to a large extent to what we now call atomic physics. He was one of the proponents of the view that the world is composed of elementary particles, and that reality is composed of nothing but these particles and the emptiness between them. And he could basically, 2070 years ago, explain pretty much everything that happens in this world. Many things, of course, flawed, but to a large extent, he triggered the science movement, and also in the Renaissance times, and his message really is that everything emerges as a recombination of fundamental particles. And nice side note is that as a consequence of this, we don't have to feel any stress as humans. We can take life very relaxedly, because this is just how nature works. We don't have to care about it, and we can live a good life because of this deep insight. So if what Lucretius said is right, and if what evolved out of this kind of thinking, namely a physics that's based on elementary particles and forces between them, does physics explain all of reality? There's no doubt that it explains part and some of reality, but does it explain all of it? And one could, I think, point to situations where it's very hard to think that a physical understanding of the world is everything that can happen. If you imagine a situation where I think that you think something, and because I think that you think something, I now take a decision and pull a trigger of a pistol or something. We have a situation that an imagination situation triggers a physical action. That's something that is certainly possible. And to some extent, yes, also physics is behind of a thought, and it's because of a thought, etc. It's all kind of neurons and electricity in neurons. But this is a situation that I think is very typical to a situation where we need a little bit more than elementary particles and emptiness between them, and maybe some forces between them. Therefore, I propose a definition of reality. Of course, I'm doing this jokingly. I'm not taking it too serious, but I'm taking it pretty serious. Reality is the set of events that can trigger events. So that includes thoughts, and thought can be an event. What is an event? An event is, I'm trying to, what is an event? An event is something that can act on something, and this is something, I think, more than a physical particle. So I don't understand what I wrote here. But if we see the world as a set of events that can trigger other events, we are already close to a modern notion of complexity. Now I can no longer shift my slides. No. So one word, what is a complex system? Here's my slide that I'm showing all the time. A complex system is a system composed of many elements, and these elements can act on each other. So the lines in the network, the links in the network represent an action between one element and the other element. These actions trigger a state change of the elements. If you tell me something, if you interact with me through communication, you tell me something, I'm changing my state, I have learned something from you. There's many different interactions possible in this system, indicated by the different link types here. And what is important is that these interactions are not static, they are not the same, not everyone interacts with everyone. These links and interactions change from 1 second to another second. And the way how the elements of the system update determine how the elements will relink themselves to the rest of the world in the next second. So the change of the network, so the networks induce a change in the elements, and the changed elements will induce changes of the interactions. And this co-evolving dynamics, this constitutes a complex system. This is something that I'm mockingly showing on this slide. There's two equations representing two things. The first top equation shows how the states of the elements are changing over time. Some function f that includes the interactions between all the particles, that's the M, the matrix, the interaction network between them, and it depends on how the states look like right now. And this is important, also the interactions, the M, the matrix, the forces between the elements change as the system is evolving as another function G. And the co-evolution of these both is a complex system. If we only have the first equation, we have what physics and natural sciences have been doing the past 300 years. But as the forces can evolve too, this is becoming something more complicated, a complex system. Why haven't we been thinking along those lines since Newton or since Lucretius? Because we as humans have never been able to see the networks and the interactions between the particles and the humans and the institutions, etc. These networks, these interactions only become visible recently through the availability of data. Big data sets are very often nothing more than data is nothing else than information about interactions or relations between two things, two objects. You think that if you think about what a database is, in a database, you're always storing relations between objects or between things. So, and if we want to understand how a system works, we need its parts, yes, of course, but also we need to know the interactions, and these become available through big data sets. These interactions in physics, we have 4 types of interactions, not more. That's what makes physics fantastically simple. These 4 interaction types, they are very different in strength. That makes things easy. Gravitation is much weaker than the strong nuclear force, for example. So we can deal with one of the forces for one phenomenon at a time. And these interactions never change in time. They're basically the same since the beginning of the universe, and don't change. This is simple. This is why physics is simple. What is new, that for complex systems now we can see the interactions, the forces between the elements of complex systems, and these forces are of many different types of interaction. These interactions can be of comparable strength, so making things much more complicated than physics, because you have to deal with many different interactions at the same time. And interactions, of course, change over time. Yes, let's skip that. So complexity science, if you buy this, you will agree that complexity science is a generalized physics, where we have generalized matter and generalized interactions. So what is generalized matter? Matter now is anything that can interact, that can create a link in a network. So that includes, of course, people, institutions, neurons, cars in the traffic, etc. Not only elementary particles. And we have generalized interactions. That's not just the 4 physical forces, but an interaction is something or anything that is able to change the state of matter, or of this generalized matter. Anything that is able to change my mind is an interaction with my mind. Yeah. So now that we have clarified what a complex system is, nothing easier than that, we can ask, what is the most complex system? And if I would ask you, maybe some of you would say it's the human brain, of course. And I would say, no, you're wrong. Ask again. Oh, but I make the story short. The most complex system, I think, is the supply chain. Now, why am I saying that? Supply chain is a fantastic object. It's a thing that produces literally everything for everyone, involving every single person on this planet. This is the ultimate coordination outcome of the coordination of 8 billion people at any point in time. No one of us is outside the supply chain. And it connects billions of brains, of course, so it's, of course, more complicated and more complex than a human brain alone. Supply chains are the foundation of the economy, of course, and the level where decisions are made in the economy is not at the government level, it's not at the national level, it's not at the industry level, it's not at the personal level. The decisions that firms make that are taken in the economy are made by firms. So the firms are the pieces of general matter that as I said before, that are able to do interactions. The decisions firms take are the interactions. They decide how to exchange goods, how to exchange money, how to exchange goods and services. They decide who to hire, who to endow with what job, and they set the prices. They decide how to distribute the things they're producing. They decide how to produce. So all the different interaction types that you can imagine possible in an economy, and these are thousands and literally thousands of ways of interaction modes. Most of them are decided on the firm level. So we are seeing, if we have, I'll show you in a second, if we see the firms acting, no, regardless if we see anything, the firms are the atoms of the economy. They are the parts that are connected to each other, and through their connection produce everything. So the supply chains are the metabolism of the society. If you've never seen an economy, here is an economy. Here is a snapshot of the supply chain network of Hungary. You see 200,000 companies. These are the green dots, most of them so small you can't see them. And they're linked through supply chain relations, networks that are, yeah, these are the black lines. There's 1.5 million of these lines. Don't see most of them, but I will zoom into this plot at any point. Then you see things like this. Here you see the supply chains. I don't know if you see my mouse, but here you see on the edge of this, you see the supply chains. But what you immediately see is that these chains are not independent. They are all bundled and linked together into a huge supply network. That's one of the amazing things. The supply chain, the global supply chain, is one giant network, and every firm and almost every person is linked to this network. This network. So this is something of Hungary. This is the same situation. You see the supply chains that are linked to each other for the economy of Ecuador. This is just those firms that make a turnover of more than $1 million per year. So it's a small subset of the economy. You see that this is a very peculiar network composed of chains, and yeah. These networks are not static structures, as you have seen right now. These were snapshots. The supply chain is a tremendously dynamic object. 25% of all the firms that you see today in the economy will not be there next year, and almost 2/3 of all the supply relations that are taking place today will not take place next year. There will be different links. So what does that mean? We have a network that is reconfiguring itself basically completely every 2 years. It's a completely new structure with new agents, with new relations between them. The economy is reinventing itself practically completely, but it's still producing the same kind of stuff, the kind of services, the kind of products that we are used to. So we're not inventing a lot, but we're what to produce and what services to provide. We're inventing ways of doing the same things in different ways. So this is a fantastically dynamic object, which is basically completely it's uncharted land of how this dynamics works. If you see these supply chains, if you make images of them, if you make movies of them, how they change, this is still not the economy. For the economy, you need two more things. You have to understand how these supply networks, how they are rewiring, how the dynamics of these networks works out, how are firms choosing other suppliers, and how are they getting to serve new customers. And the other thing that you have to do, or to understand, if you want to understand the economy on this atomistic level, you need to estimate what the firms are doing, what they're producing, what inputs they're using, how they're combining these inputs to produce what kind of outputs. So if we're able to do that, if we are able to use data sets to estimate the production functions of every single firm in a country, which of course we cannot, but we can at least estimate and try to do that. And knowing that we make errors, we get an estimate of these production functions. It's just a formula of what we think a production function is. It's a combination of a Leontief production function and a linear production function, for those that of you that know what I'm talking about. And if we have a concept of how companies are substituting suppliers that they might lose because some suppliers go out of business or are no longer reachable due to, I don't know, taxes or tariffs or blockades or something, how do companies substitute for those lost suppliers? If you make assumptions about this and again estimate for different firms how they are doing this, you can turn the supply chain data that we now have for some of the some countries, we can turn this into a model, into an agent-based model where every company that you have data for is an agent in an agent-based model. You can make a one-to-one digital twin or copy of an economy, of a national economy. That's something that's only possible since a few years. Now, why would one ever try to do such a thing? What could be done better with such a one-to-one model? What can be done that economists cannot do? I think for the first time, we can ask the question if it's really true that markets are allocating resources optimally. This is a dogma, of course, of economics, that markets are leading to situations where resources are allocated optimally. But is it really so? If we have the supply chains in front of us, and if we can, if we have these supply chains in front of us, how the economy works, and if we can find rearrangements of these networks that would produce the same stuff with less resources, we would prove this economic dogma wrong, that markets automatically lead of the best of all worlds, which many of us might question even without such a proof. We can open or reopen a 100-year-old debate, namely, are markets more efficient than a planning economy? 100 years ago, it was the Soviet Union that was the prototype of a planning economy. And of course, that failed. But only because, or it failed because, to a large extent, because computing power was not there. Data was missing about how production was happening, and computer power to interpret this kind of data was not there. They did not have the supply chain data. They did not have the computing power that we have today. So we could ask, could an algorithm find better supply chain networks that are more resilient, less greenhouse gas emitting, and producing the same kind of goods and services that we want to have as mankind? We can, if we have the supply chain networks in front of us, we can literally see where wealth is created and how wealth is distributed. So is this done in a fair way? Is this what we really want? We can make this visual. We can make systemic risk visible. That was not possible to do a decade ago. That we could say this firm is this and that relevant for our society. And by knowing which firm is how systemically important one can, in a targeted way, improve resilience of economies, of nations. One can improve policy. I will show you maybe an example for this, and yeah, many other things. So if we have supply chains in front of us, we can ask the question, if we take out a single company of that supply chain, we can ask how much will GDP go down? This is something that we really do in our models. We kick out one company after the other and compute the damage that is done to the supply chain. And we find this curve here. What do we see here? We see on the y-axis the economic systemic risk index. That's the percentage of the GDP that's affected if a particular company goes out of business. So I don't see my mouse. Here's my mouse. This company sitting here, if we would take this company out of business, we would experience a shock to the economy of 25%. So this is a disaster. And there's about 25 companies in Hungary that if you take out one of them, you would have an immediate crash of the economy of 25%. Then you have about 100, 200 companies that if you take out one of them, you have damage more than 1% of the GDP, which is also still a huge impact. And then we have about 100,000 firms that have no systemic relevance at all. So for every company, we can now say how relevant are they for the society. We can take a closer look even at the product level. For some products, we can track, for example, for food products, where are they produced, how are they stored, how they're manufactured, how they're packaged, how are they distributed to the supermarkets. What you see in the lower right here is the supply chain network for pork meat in Austria. So there's 20,000 firms and 5,000 supermarkets where many farms, many slaughterhouses, many storage and logistics firms involved. It's the 20,000 companies that you need to provide the population with pork. We're building for the Ministry of Agriculture a monitor that can be used in times of crisis to know exactly what food item is available in which supermarket. But I spare you that. What you can also do when you have supply chains, you can ask 10,000 of questions, and you now have the ability to answer them much better than what you could do before. I'll show you what we did recently when we asked how fast is the energy transition really happening. So we know that, for example, in Europe, we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. That's European law, that's a European aim. How well are we doing on this way? So if we have the supply chain information, we have it's the Hungarian supply chain. In the supply chain, we find all the energy producers, all the oil producers, gas producers, the vendors of coal, the electricity producers. And we see how every firm, A, B, C, D here, where they are buying their energy from. So we see this from the supply chain data. So for every firm, we can infer their carbon footprint. This is firm I here. They get some oil, they get some gas, they get some electricity, and some of this electricity is renewable. That's the green part. We see, or we can compute the carbon footprint of every company, and we can see how the green part of the electricity, how this is increasing, how the renewable fraction of the energy footprint of a company, how that's increasing over time. We can do that for all the 100,000 companies in Hungary. And if the slope of this curve is steep, then the company is getting greener very quick. If the slope would be flat, it's not getting greener. If the slope would be negative, the company would get browner. Now, let's do this for all companies. Here's the companies that we are looking at in Hungary, 100,000 companies. The size is how big these companies are. And on the x-axis, whatever you see is right to the 0 line here. These companies are getting greener, but all companies on the left of this 0 line here are getting browner. So this is a devastating picture. If you know how to read it, it tells you that, yes, there's many firms that are getting greener, very nice, but the same amount, but more or less the same a number of firms is getting browner. So what is the net effect? How quick is the energy transition taking place in the supply chain in Hungary? And this is what we see on this plot on the upper left panel. In the last 5 years in Hungary, we were seeing this increase of the green energy in the supply chain, meaning nothing. There is no energy transition. If we are extrapolating what is going on, or how quick the transition is going on right now into the future to 2050, where Europe should be carbon neutral, meaning the green curve should be up to 100%, we see that we clearly fail that aim. So very dark image. Skip that. And come to, in the last 10 minutes, I show you a second example where the image of co-evolving networks of a complex system, now it's not the supply chain, now it's the society, can be partially understood with methods of complexity science. So the question is, societies are polarizing. We feel that. Is that really so? First question. And the second question, why is this happening? Why on earth are we so much more polarized than we were 25 years ago? Let me start with this motivation, and I don't have to do that. What Homo sapiens can do best is managing networks. Everything we do is thinking in networks. So we talked about the supply chain. Of course, there's the communication networks. There's the internet as a fantastic network. There's trade is happening on networks. Food supply, financial dependencies are networks. A school is nothing but a network of people meeting. That's an image that we did for the Ministry of Health, how virus spreading would happen in a school when we show all the interactions that happen in a school in a particular day. The healthcare system is a network of flows of patients. Your own health is part of a disease propagation network. Traffic. Sorry for the image. I didn't find a better picture for showing traffic. Traffic is of course a network. Social networks are networks. So if so much depends on networks, we will realize that we still don't know if a network changes, what does that imply for the system it constitutes? So if networks change, systems change, sometimes very little, sometimes radically. If networks change, the systems will function different than they functioned before. And what does that mean? So if a societal network changes, how does society change? It's a good question. ChatGPT does not tell you much interesting answers, so we have to work for them ourselves. What is a society? I'm sure we can debate a long time what we think a society is. Here's a couple of points that certainly play a role in what a society is. So society takes decisions together. It distributes who leads and who follows, who has executive powers and who does not. Society has to do with our culture, how we deal with ourselves, how we treat each other, how much we respect each other, etc. Opinion formation processes are extremely important. Collective adaptation is a process that is happening in societies. We are sharing narratives that bind us together and synchronize us, and how we distribute the things the artifacts and things that we are producing and the actions we do, how do we share our work, etc. These are things that are important for society. So if we assume that the communication networks in societies become denser, because we are introducing more and more technology, we have introduced the telephone, we have introduced the internet, the cell phones, the smartphones, social networks, etc. If communication becomes denser, people get to know each other better. That might imply that they trust each other more, that they cooperate more, that they understand each other more, they are more tolerant. So one would expect that society becomes more egalitarian, democratic, and friendlier. But is that really so? That's the question. Let's ask the data. If we ask people, and sociologists are doing this from time to time, so every dot that you see here is a sociological study or a survey, and these have been done in different countries, many different years since the Second World War. If you are asked the question, or in the survey question, you can be asked, or you are asked, how many close friends do you have? The answer before 2008-9 was 2 friends, 2 close friends. So of course it's people will explain what a close friend means. But if you ask people today or after 2010, how many close friends do you think you have? You will say, twice as much as that, 4 or 5 people. And it doesn't matter if this is in the United States or in Germany or in Norway or in the Netherlands. We seem to have a jump of densification of our maybe most important network that we have, those people that we trust. So our close friendship network. So there's something happening radically around the year 2010. What was that? I think so. This first line is when the first smartphone was introduced, and the second line is when Facebook, the first social medium, went publicly online. So that might have been the reason for this tremendous densification of our most important networks. Okay, I'm for the sake of time, I'm jumping a little bit, showing you another plot. Focus on the top panel, on the lower panel we have just seen. The top panel shows you gray dots here. These are survey results, again from sociologists, many different studies. This shows you the level of polarization in the US society. This is only data for the US. When we see that polarization before 2008, 9, 10 is low, at this level here. At 2008 or 9, it starts jumping and increases tremendously. Okay, now you could ask, wow, this seems to happen at the same time as the inflation of our friendships occurs. And what we said is there a causal understanding possible how an identification of networks could lead to an inflation, a drastic and spontaneous inflation of polarization. So what did we do? We resorted to an agent-based model of a society where we model humans as stress minimizers. What does that mean? If I meet a friend, what do? We go for a beer, typically. And what do we do then? We start talking. And what we're doing is typically that we are comparing our opinions. We bring up one topic after the other. I say my opinion, my friend tells me his opinion or her opinion, and then we go on talking. And if our opinions align a lot, we remain friends. We will go for another beer. We enjoyed this time. If many of our opinions do not align, if we start quarreling at every other topic that we bring up, maybe the evening will not be so pleasant, and we will not meet again so quickly. And if we don't see each other so quickly, our friendship might become a little bit weaker over time. So this is basically everything to the model. Now, in the agent-based model, people meet, they compare their opinions. If their opinions align, they remain friends. If they don't align, if they misalign strongly, then they don't meet each other again. Or if they are really, if they have opposite opinions a lot, then they become even enemies. This can be formulated in an elegant way with a single formula, blah blah blah, and then we can run simulations and understand something that's interesting for societies. What we see is there is a phase transition in society. I'm not going into details, I'm just jumping to this plot again. We can see, if we are incorporating this kind of simple friendship model in the society, that if you are increasing in the model the density of friendships, that you see a polarization phase transition. This is the red dots, the red crosses that you see in this plot. This is the model that I was just trying to tell you, realized in a large-scale agent-based simulation. And what we do is that we are increasing over the simulation the density between people in this simulation. And then what we recover, so we're basically implementing this dashed line, this increased friendship density in our simulation. And what we get in how polarized this artificial society is, we get out these red crosses. And almost miraculously, this model explains this transition of polarization as a necessary result of this densification. So what is important here, you could not understand this if you did not employ this co-evolutionary aspects, that opinions in people and their friendships co-evolve together. And the model that I showed you is maybe one of the simplest possible of these co-evolution models that I also showed you, and that constitute a complex systems in the sense that I showed you in the beginning, that the networks change the opinions of the nodes, and the changed opinions change the networks. Okay, so that's the conclusion. The denser the network gets, the more it polarizes, and this is necessarily so. And there's only three possibilities to get around this, to redo or to undo this fragmentation. The first possibility is to change the network, to make the social networks or the friendship networks less dense again. That basically means please return your cell phones and smartphones to your vendor. Or you could increase tolerance. You could not take the opinions of your friends, and especially of your enemies, so relevant anymore. And it already would help to just ignore the opinion of your enemies. a little bit more that we're doing at the moment. The cool statement that these kind of models make is that there is no other ways out of this fragmentation. There's certainly many factors that amplify polarization and fragmentation in a society, but it's a process that happens at the microscopic level of how humans interact that leads to a phase transition in polarization. I think understanding this could, in the spirit of Lucretius, take out a lot of stress of society. At least we would not look at the origins of polarization and fragmentation on the wrong side. And with this, I think I am over time already. With this, I stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So as I said in the chat, we're now in the question and answer portion of the discussion. So if you raise your hand via the Zoom function, then Jan will be able to field some of your questions, and Stefan can answer as well. You can also freely unmute yourself if you would like to contribute as well. Jan, you're muted. There we go.
Now I'm unmuting. Who's the first to?
Ilian has his hand up.
Ilian.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. A very interesting view of it, of polarization particularly, and I'll stay with that since I know much less and have thought much less about the supply chain, though that really was fascinating. But almost as a consequence of the way of thinking of supply chain, I wonder in the polarization whether the way that you've formulated it takes into account the the political, social supply chains, if you will, in societies, that because we get fed in different ways by a kind what I think of as a metaphor for the supply chain. And what I'm maybe most familiar with in the US is that some of this supply chain of polarization, that intentionally constructed polarization in the US, starting primarily from Reagan, and Gingrich and Contract for America, that has really shifted things. That was amplified certainly by technology and that transition that you show. I can certainly imagine that was the case. But I just wonder what your thoughts are on the kind of background framing and narratives that come out of that supply chain, in quotes. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm producing this echo. I don't know what to do. Yeah. Now I can't hear you anymore, but I see that you can hear me. The model that we are that we are proposing here is really about your closest friends, those people that you talk to, that you trust, that you listen to, that would have a handle on your opinion a little bit. So these are really your 2 to 5 closest friends. If you imagine you have 2 of them, as we might have had before 2008 on average, you will do nothing to change these 2. You will stick to them, even if you disagree. You're forced to be tolerant. If we have 5 closest friends with whom we talk about this and this, okay, if we don't get along with number 5 super well, then okay, let's change this one. Maybe also 4. The 3 I keep, but 2 I exchange. If everyone is doing that, we are arranging a large part, a large fraction of the network. And this then happens, of course, in a homophilic way. People that think like-minded, they form a bubble. And what we find in this model, what is happening is not polarization, as we think of it. There's the conservatives and the liberals, two camps, but it's fragmenting into tiny bubbles of 20 to 50 people. And this then, so if this is taking place, I think, regardless of any output influence or supply chains or propaganda that's fed in or advertisements that are that people are exposed to, or campaigns that try to flip your opinion. But these campaigns and advertisements and noise, this then amplifies this situation, and this allows these little bubbles to align into camps. And this is a secondary process, I think. Mm. And without this polarization, it would without this fragmentation, it would be so much harder to polarize. Mm-hmm. I think that's where external, propaganda can be so much more easily amplified than in a world with fewer close links.
Just if I may just add, sort of respond to a piece of that, we put together the idea of paper in Futures a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, about narratives and what we thought of as sticky narratives. And this fragmentation and bubbles are because those become resonant for some people. That is, that they speak to preconceptions, desire for cohesion. I mean, some of it is simply the desire for being part of this community that has this view, but that then very often, given the kind of technology that allows this, fragment and move to a different resonant state narrative that goes on. So I think that fits in an interesting way. So thank you. This helps me think differently about this.
Thank you.
Okay. Do I see other hands raised? Peter, Atsushi, Sean?
Yeah, I have a question, Stefan. Thanks for your presentation. You mentioned that you were researching companies of 1 million and more in your network. You showed sort of halfway your presentation. And when I realized, when I saw your pictures, it looked like sort of a complex adaptive system, a network, more or less like that. But if you take the companies of 1 million, realizing that these things are mostly scaling, could it be that below the million, there is a far larger size than above the million in size and influence on the complex system. What do you think? Is that some mindful thought? Just to take into account if you think about the self-organization of these systems. You nicely showed afterwards.
So maybe you don't understand. We haven't. Can you repeat? I must ask everyone to turn off the. Now the echo is gone. No, it's still there. God, I don't know.
I think it is just on your side, Stefan, which is
Okay.
strange. I'm not sure why.
I think no. Okay, I have to turn.
Can you hear me?
Can't hear you, but I just
Okay.
I did not understand what you mean by scaling.
What I mean by that, you have companies of 1 million, of 10 million, of 100 million, 1 billion going up. That number decreases. The bigger the company, the less you will find. And when you have lower, smaller companies, all the way down to little family companies, you will see probably an exponential increase of the number of these companies in a society. I think that could be maybe $10 billion companies and maybe $1 million, $100,000 companies. That's what I mean. And then the size below 1 million could be far bigger in number in the system than the group of companies above 1 million. And then I think if you look to these beautiful, complex, dynamic systems, at least I don't say that, let's put it this way, that group that you don't take into account is nevertheless self-organizing. That's a big chunk of society. And that has an influence. And that's sort of what I'm thinking. What is the influence of that group, which I assume is larger than the one you measure, on the dynamics of society?
Yeah, very good. We are looking at this data is value-added tax data. Company A paying value-added tax to company B. And so what do we not see in this data? We don't see all of the black market. And that could be a huge portion of
That's a good point, yeah.
Up to maybe a third or half of the economy we don't see. Then what do we also not see? We don't see the German products coming into the country.
Of course. Oh, yeah.
Also, come on, what if you have a European country like Hungary here? If we just forget everything that flows in from Germany, what is this? Is that relevant or not? And yes, the answer is no. For many questions, we're making so tremendous wrong, getting such a wrong picture that we cannot answer many questions. Some we can. Some structural questions we can, like systemic risk, etc., or these energy questions. This certainly can do. Other things, of course, not. This will also always lead us to a situation where we are overestimating systemic risks.
Oh, yeah.
Know that if coming to the question of scaling for the country of Ecuador, we have everyone in the data set with a tax number. So it's of course anonymized, but it includes, I think, close to 2 million people, 10% of the population. And most of these companies are single-person companies.
Yeah, that's the way was it.
Of bananas in the market in Quito.
Yeah.
So again, we're not complete yet, not having everyone in the system.
I can imagine that seems logical.
It's already pretty close to individuals, at least in such a way that we can now try to answer questions like, what if a banana virus hits Ecuador? Right now, what if Putin is no longer importing bananas from Ecuador because he was offended by a political statement of a president or something? How will farmer Gonzalez in this valley, in this city, be affected? How much less income will he have? We're close to being able to answer questions like this. Is this relevant? I don't know. But in times of reducing budgets and more expectations to governments, at least after times of crisis and disaster, I think one could build very useful tools to.
Yeah. That's not quite behind my question that it wouldn't be useful. It is more, how can you put it in perspective in that interaction? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
There's a question from Ernst Puppel. He raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stefan. During active duty, I had many friends, many functional friends, actually. And after retirement, much less, yeah, maybe actually one. And I'm myself the best friend, perhaps, right? So I guess you would have a completely different picture if you look at a different, let's say, age. Yeah, but this was not my point. In the beginning, you started a competition between brain and supply chains. So the brains are actually quite good, actually, in dealing certain things, right? They create some kind of dynamic stability. And they have some kind of interaction, which is excitation, inhibition between neurons, right? In gigantic networks, which are actually quite big also, right? I think one can compete here, indeed. Yeah? And so here, inhibition is, of course, important. Yeah? So you do not refer to this in your model, excitation, inhibition, intensity, disinhibition of functions. You see the interaction. I learned in neuroanatomy by Wallenauter at MIT. He said every neuron is connected with each other only with 4 intermediate neurons. Yeah, so it's a different system. Can you perhaps apply your models to a system which actually has created stability, dynamic stability?
Wouldn't you say that a supply chain over very long time periods creates systemic stability?
For certain products, indeed. But I think that was rather abstract. Yeah, you always have to look at a specific demand. Yeah, and I think only at one point you said in your presentation there you focused on something like. So it's like gigantic diversity of products, of things that has to be satisfied. Yeah, and the reward systems in the brain are also a nice area, by the way. And I think I wonder whether the model looks a bit different compared to, let's say, short-term demands, mid-term demands, my long-term demands of 10 years, short-term, I want to have a beer now.
This is something that is not yet in our models, but this plays, of course, a decisive role in how the economy works, these different time scales, etc. None of this was always even touched. In an economy, we have mostly excitatory dynamics, right? Inhibitory dynamics is very rarely it's also not true. It would be very, very interesting to do a one-to-one correspondence mapping between a biological neural network and the economy. If a company, for example, has a production function, it has certain inputs of different kinds to produce an output. For a neuron to produce an output, they also have inputs, but this is always of the same type. And you're adding up stimuli from other neurons until you hit the threshold, and then you produce an output which is of the same type of the inputs. In that way, supply chains are a much more diverse system. Maybe not more complex, but
more complicated, huh?
Much more bookkeeping to do than in a neural network. And what comes much closer to biological neural network is financial networks. What is happening on financial markets, where nodes in this network, banks, for example, they get inputs in form of money and outputs in form of credit is also in money. So the difference is only in adding up the inputs to create an output, which is again different than a neural signal in biology. The details matter here. If you're changing details here, you're changing your phase diagrams. You're changing the parameter regions where you can expect big transitions in the system. So if you want to understand these tipping points and transition points and phase diagrams, it's very important to get the details right. I don't know if I answered anything close to what you asked.
Well, let's try this. I'm at present in Shanghai. Perhaps we have a chance in Shanghai.
Yeah.
All right. I see a hand raised by Joffa.
Good morning. Hi, Stefan. Thank you very much for your presentation. I thought it was super interesting. So I've got a comment on both of the models. First of all, I've long suspected that density in networks and social networks and increase in population has caused a phase transition, so to speak, in the way social dynamics work. It occurs to me, though, that if you have people that are really good friends, I suppose it depends on how you define really close friend, but a really close friend is somebody who could possibly change my mind.
Yes.
And somebody that I am not going to worry about trying opinions out, or as people say, thinking in draft or whatever. But I would imagine that there are many alternative mechanisms that would produce the same results for the density graph, if that makes sense.
I'm very certain that there's many different mechanisms of how you can get the same result. And there's already two other teams in the world, one at the Santa Fe Institute, one in Amsterdam, that are using different models of a society, agent-based models of society. What they do is they densify the underlying networks and measure the polarization, and they get very similar results. They also see the phase transition in polarization as a function of density, and the models are different, and the mechanisms, but the mechanism is the same. There's this strong homophilic tendency. We like to be close to people that think alike, that cause little stress. And if you implement this homophily part and allow for the networks to change, then with densification, you will arrive at this fragmentation phase, or at this bubble phase, as we call it.
Yeah, I just think it's conceptually really interesting that you can have a variety of different mechanisms, whether it's somebody doesn't want to bring up topics, or you've got, I think maybe have a bit more of affinity toward the idea that it's information bubbles. So what you're processing and what you're sharing and what you're talking about as far as what information you're receiving, that manifests really strongly here in the US, where some people just don't have the same story, aren't seeing the same thing as other people. So I see that as a dynamic, but it's just really interesting to me that with the densification and a variety of different, I don't know what you would call it, decision mechanisms or social mechanisms at the individual interaction level, you end up with the same sort of result. And I suspect that this demonstrates that there's probably a variety of reasons that this polarization is happening. But the key thing that is similar is that densification has this result. And I think it's curious that there's a variety of different interaction mechanisms that lead to the same solution. Okay, so anyway, I thought that was very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I just like to point out that firms aren't autonomous agents, that firms are actually individuals making decisions as well, based on various beliefs, narratives, and incentives. I really like the presentation of networks, and I know that you are dealing with really interesting access to data sets that enable the ability to create these vast networks. But for me, I wouldn't say that the supply chain or the network is the most important part. It is, because that is not what is driving a change. So it's individual people's decisions about what contract they're going to sign with whom, or what they're going to produce, and what incentives they're aligning with, rather, is it shareholder profit? Is it, I'm sure a network that was designed around worker managed firms would look very different than big conglomerate networks that are interested in maximizing shareholder value. So I'm personally very interested in those underlying dynamics in an economy about incentives and for example, how are we defining efficiency? So are we talking about a Pareto optimality efficiency, which means that it's anathema to redistribute endowments, right? Which means that if somebody has something, it's inefficient to take it away from them. So it's a really interesting definition of efficiency. So there's just so many, again, beliefs, narratives behind the individual decision-making that result in various network forms. So I really appreciated your comment about whether or not, a banana virus in Ecuador, how is it useful to know how it may impact, a particular farmer. And so, yeah, I do think that there will be many cases where knowing something like that would be interesting, but you're still not impacting how those networks were actually constructed to begin with. Let's see, I forgot who it was that, I think Ilan, I don't remember who it was that brought up the question of what happens, maybe it was Peter, what happens if you start incorporating all of these more local interactions, even if it's a one-person interaction. Certainly you would want to make sure that you're distinguishing between production of goods and services. And then again, devil's in the details, right? So when you're talking about decision-making, how many of the firms on your particular network are actually subsidiaries of something bigger? So where is the decision-making actually coming from, and all of that? Anyway, none of this is criticism. These are just questions. I think it's all super interesting work, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you, Joffa. Fully agree with with everything you say. It's people that decide, and it's not very often. It's not the shareholders. It's visible in our work that it's people that decide, and how hard it is to understand these decisions. For example, decisions of changes of suppliers. This is what we see in the data. This is something that we would like to understand. We would like to learn. Nowadays, we would like to learn, or let the machine learn the changing patterns. And this is so tremendously hard. We thought this is now a clear exercise. We train a network, large language model on the rewiring rules of how firms are actually rewiring. We have billions of events, so no lack of data, and then we can start predicting and suggesting to firms of how they could consider to relink. And we're now working for 2.5 years on this problem of learning relinking patterns, and we're failing. This shows us that there is a human factor, and something like trust. Why are people engaging in economic contracts? Because they trust each other. That's something we do not see in any data. We cannot capture that, and that's why we're blind. We cannot learn these relinking patterns. Very frustrating, but maybe possible door to much deeper understanding of human decisions on the firm level happen. And then again, how does the Homo sapiens really organize itself? And yes, ownership structures are another obvious thing, which we can get into the equation a little bit easier, because at least for big companies, the ownership, very often you can read off data. So you know which small companies belong to a bigger one, and then that might constrain decisions a lot, but certainly not for things like trust.
Yeah, I'm curious as to, so I wonder if you could do like almost, I'm going to use this term very loosely because I don't mean it exactly, I mean it generally, which is more like a PCA, like just compress or simplify your network. And instead of looking at firms, look at decision makers, right? So who are the individuals that are deciding? I mean, because it's very interesting, even in the AI landscape, you're down to 4 people, right? I mean, there's 4 individuals determining the course of human history at this point.
I didn't understand your comment on a PCA.
Oh, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have used the term because I know that you like technical terms to be used properly. I simply meant as simplifying the network. So instead of looking at all the firms, start looking at the firms. So basically, if you've got 18 firms that are subsidiaries of a single firm, that you collapse those down into one.
Yeah, these are things that we're doing all the time.
Yeah.
But this touches an important point, that whenever you do something to the network, whenever you start aggregating to make your life a little bit easier, you might throw out information that is essential. And I didn't go into all of these details, but there's certain types of firms that if you touch those and you start aggregating and playing with them, then you can induce massive effects. And again, showing a feature of complex systems that details matter.
Yeah. So I just remember seeing, I think it was, I want to say Celeste out of the Lausanne group, does a lot of network stuff. And so she was focusing particularly on ecosystems. So basically take Honda and then what's everything that's connected to Honda? And at what point, and it's just a matter of horse grading, right? So at what point does that whole setup, which is all of the small suppliers that make Honda be able to do what it does, at what point do those act as a single decision body? Anyway, these are all questions. I'm completely aware that it's aggregation and how much detail. It's always it's the art. It's what makes her work fun, actually.
Yeah.
I see Ernst still has his hand up, or you didn't get it down? Ernst?
No, I did not. I did not take it away. No.
Oh, okay.
So, but while you talk to me, I think the model is mainly based on explicit knowledge. And humans are characterized, of course, by explicit and implicit tacit knowledge. Yeah? And so this probably should be introduced. So I should take my hand down. Thank you.
Okay. The speakers of the two previous webinars, Sander and Atsushi, do you have any comments on the talk by Stefan?
Oh, well, similar to previous question, you started out by the comparison between atoms and firms. And my point was that atom doesn't have a free will or intention, while the firms does, based on the individual comprising those firms. And what is your explanation about or comparison between those two, phenomena?
Yes.
In terms of the intention and will.
Yeah. So yes, if I talk about the atoms of the economy, the next question is, what is the Schrödinger equation of the economy, right? Otherwise, I said nonsense with the atoms. And this is exactly, we were saying this jokingly a couple of years ago, but now we're really into that question. The atoms don't have a free will. Firms have a free will. That means if firms have a free will, I cannot know it. That means firms are unpredictable to a certain extent, right? That's what you mean by that. And then I would respond to it, okay, but atoms are even more unpredictable. If you look at the individual atom, you don't know where its electrons will be, how its orbitals will be filled, and you have no way of knowing. You have the Schrödinger equation, you have some probabilities, but you are completely in the dark of what that atom will, how that will interact with another one in a double slit experiment or something like this. So from that, I would say firm is unpredictable in a certain way, atoms are unpredictable in a certain way. But if you put atoms together, and if you ask what is the collective property of these atoms, solid state physics, then you can say, okay, now still the Schrödinger equation is there and something governing the whole dynamics of wave equations, blah, blah, blah. But I can now compute the properties of matter. I can compute all of the properties of almost all matter. I can understand why a piece of metal is black, why it's shiny, why it conducts, how much it conducts electricity or temperature. And I can even compute new materials even without building them, based on the basic features of atoms and their interactions. So I can make predictions, extremely successful predictions on the collective completely unpredictable components. And to a certain extent, this is the hope that we can still do in complex systems. In complex systems, we don't only have the problem of unpredictable components like a firm, but we also have unpredictable interactions, which is a little bit better than in physics. And this is something we cannot put our mind around, of how a Schrödinger equation with fluctuating potentials would look like. We do not have a concept of this, but it's fun to think about this.
Yeah, and you can do that in physics, because you can repeat the experiment in the same identical condition again and again. But in a human phenomena, it's unrepeatable. But disconnect to our previous and my talk and Sanders' talk, it's all about the measurement. I think measurement processes, and well, it's the logic behind it can be connected to what Ernst pointed out, the tacit and implicit, way of implicit cognition that the brain function is. That really matters for this prediction. And well, it's just my throwing my thought in on the table, but I have no conclusion. But I think I saw some connections between our previous two talks and the current talk through that point. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
You want me to say something? Yeah. My first reaction is, what an incredible, beautiful piece of work to get to that level of complexity and to work with it. Now, if I try and be a little bit more critically constructive, there's a couple of points that I wanted to make. And one of them is that there actually is very interesting work in cognitive science, where if you bring people together and let them interact a substantive amount of time, their brains start going in the same direction if you take the IRM kind of imagery. And so there is yet another explanation there for the whole thing of splitting opinions and things like that. But maybe even more important is what Stefan has not been doing, but he's been signaling that it has to be done. I mean, the whole debate about free will is a very, very long historical debate that goes back, 5-6 centuries. I think one of the really interesting things that we see here is that you are beginning, but are not getting very far, I have to say, in dealing with that as an issue itself. I mean, the way it came out in this discussion was very much sort of, individuals have a will. I would argue that there are good ways and good reasons to actually not take individuals with individual free will, but actually look at what they decide as a collective, very complex systems of itself. And so there are two of my immediate comments. It was, for me, a subject which I didn't know very well and which came across, I think, in a very effective way. So thank you very much, Stefan.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. So this is yeah, great. In economics, traditional economics, there's no people taking decisions, right? A firm is a profit maximizer. There's no free will. It's just doing a very mechanistic thing. And what we are seeing by trying to learn how decisions are made. We see that they are taken, but we have no understanding of how they are made and no way of predicting. That tells us an important lesson what economics cannot do, and we still, of course, also cannot do. But no one
Well,
can do.
I would
knows this.
agree and beg to disagree. I agree with you that economics does this, but economics does it in such a reduced dimension set that I think we're not hitting yet, and I don't blame anybody because this is incredibly difficult, but we're not yet hitting the full range of variables that enter into the collective decision making. And I think that is inevitable, and it's not a critique of what you are trying to do. It is just, like I always do, what is the next step?
Thank you.
I think we're approaching more or less the
Yeah.
where's Courtney?
Yes, I'm here.
What does the clock say? 4:45.
Yes,
Yeah.
4:45. Yeah.
Well, there's still the possibility to have some free discussion, I think. But before we start that, I want to thank Stefan for doing a fantastic job on a very complex topic, I would say. I personally, as always, I learn a lot from you, Stefan, and that continues to be the case. So